Hi, my name is Lisa Cesario. I'm a teacher in a life skills classroom, and I work with youth from grade 8 to grade 12, and I'm here with my colleagues today. And we attended this conference today. One of the reasons is we see a lot of our students come to our classroom. Not all the students have autism, but most do. And they have mental health problems come up within grade 8, grade 9, once puberty comes in and whatnot. And it's quite a challenge for those students and for the families. And we see more violence in the classroom, can be quite traumatizing for the other students, staff, whatnot. And we're wondering what the mental health professionals on the panel, what discussions you're having regarding education for these students when they're going through these troubling times with mental health, and kind of what's acceptable and what's not, because a lot of times it comes back to, well, it's the autism, they're going through a stage. But then as educators and professionals, we also have to protect the other students in the classroom and keep a happy, friendly environment. So just wondering what discussions are out there currently.
So I think mental health issues are the sort of great black hole of service provision for people with ASD, whether they're youth or adults. So as you know, in British Columbia, if you have intellectual disabilities as an adult, CLBC have a legal obligation to provide services for you. And about 5 or 6 years ago, they set up something called the Personalised Supports Initiative for individuals with ASD who didn't meet the IQ cutoff, but were still facing lots of problems. And they recently surveyed the 460 odd people receiving Personalised Supports Initiative, and the rates of mental health issues were higher than those shown by Jonathan, and in fact 100% of the sample reported anxiety. And for most people with ASD, anxiety really is their Achilles heel. So more often than not, anger isn't really anger. That's not the underlying problem. It's that the person has been put in a situation where they can't cope and they're getting anxious, and if you put any of us in that situation, anger is one possible outcome. So I think it's really important to try and unpick the situation in the classroom and work out, is it that the demands on the person are exceeding their current capacity to fulfill them, or is the communication obscure in some way? But with the best will in the world, I don't think one's ever going to eradicate angry outbursts by either typically developing children or those with ASD. But I think Jonathan rightly put a lot of emphasis on teaching people self-management strategies. Jonathan referred to that nice theory of intelligence by, what was the name of the guy? Gardner. But there's an equally interesting one by someone called Sternberg, called a Triarchic theory of intelligence. And the nice thing about that is that he identifies 3 areas, one of which people with ASD suffer from mightily, which is difficulties with planning and self-regulation. And so, in addition to trying to minimize the provoking stimuli for anxiety and anger, I think overtly teaching people to recognize when they're about to lose it, and to have simple strategies to remove themselves from the situation, regroup, and then get some help in how do I break that problem down and attack it in a slightly different way. And usually in education systems we're lousy at that bit. We teach people facts, we don't teach them how to break something down and formulate a plan for tackling it. And I think ASD is a good example of how we could be doing a lot more very simple stuff, but very effective things. Do you want to?
I think that's excellent. You know, the idea of when I think to clients that I work with, adolescents who have ASD, and there seems to be repeated crises in the room, and the 2 shifts that we we typically make that seem to be successful. One is to move from this idea of a curative model of care to a coping model, and we really look to see how are we going to cope to the best that we can as the professionals and the students to have the best outcome. So it's not of dealing with this as a problem and then once it's dealt with, we're good. It's really an ongoing idea of how are we going to cope with this as well as we can. And the second is developing a plan that is agreed upon at the that everybody can buy into, and then to see about sticking with it. I like to tell people that if everybody develops a plan and is into it and kind of has that buy-in, and the plan doesn't work, there's no need to beat yourself up over missing that target in the end. If you developed a plan that everybody agreed upon and you stuck with it, right? It just wasn't the right kind of effective kind of component, and that plan involves everybody at the table that Tony was speaking about another, and if it doesn't work, then it's to regroup and set up a new plan, and through that as professionals, you're actually modeling for that teen, okay, I have to do this for myself, right? And so it's a process, and so I've seen that in the schools that work really well with those high needs kind of behavioral or emotional kind of crises that happen are the ones that model that planning that Tony was speaking about, that self-management, but they do it on a team level, and then they regroup, and if it doesn't work, it's not like, again, there's no hair shirt, right? We set up this plan, let's try again, let's rewind the clock, what's next? And that kind of approach, in the long run, I think helps all the students as much as possible.
I'd like to add, we've talked a lot in the last few minutes about what can we do as adults for our students, and I think it's important to ask ourselves, what can the student do for himself or for herself? And part of this is teaching those coping skills to the student, teaching self-regulation tools to that student so they understand their own triggers. They understand what's going on in the environment that's going to set them off. And there's many ways to do that through visual supports, through progressive muscle relaxation, teaching those. CBT, as Dr. Weiss talked about, is very effective, particularly for students who are higher functioning. So as adults, yes, we need to put plans in place, but also have that student be a meaningful and purposeful part of that intervention. And the reason why that's so important is I like to keep a lifespan perspective in mind. And that child is going to grow up, and they are going to somewhat move out of that protective nature of the school system and of the family. And I'm thinking more about post-secondary education, where some are overwhelmed by all the academic expectations. If we can teach them coping strategies earlier in life, those are going to come a lot quicker when they're older. And by virtue of that, they're gaining independence.
Can I thank not just Jonathan, but all of the panelists today? A stunning presentation by Jonathan this morning, but really a lot of insights from every single panel member that I think